Okay, so today I would love to share some of my experiences of being on GB News on Saturday, talking to Philip Davies and Esther McVeigh, two Conservative MPs, and just want to share some of my thoughts around that. So on Saturday, so 4 or 5 days ago, I was invited onto GB News to speak live to Philip Davies and Esther McVeigh. And I will put into the description the actual excerpt of where I'm talking. Essentially, I was being asked questions about what my boarding school experience was, and then there was a guy who was for boarding school. He's a professor who hadn't actually been to boarding school himself. He had been fostered, but that was, the conversation. Again, you can watch yourself. So I just wanted to share a few thoughts. So first of all, I was very nervous, as we know, as ex-boarders. One of the unwritten rules is you don't speak up, even if there's sexual abuse, even if there's horrific things. You don't speak up. People like George Orwell spoke about that, I believe, and other authors. It's like that was the unwritten rule: you do not grass. So yeah, that brought stuff up for me. Um, you know, with that being said, I did share some of my personal experiences. Losing a friend to suicide, sexual abuse, and they were shocked. But it's like, oh, well, that must be a one-off. And actually, I was sharing stories from Bear Grylls, from Richard Branson, from David Cameron, from John Peel. John Peel was raped at school. David Cameron, he lost a stone in weight. Things like this. Richard Branson, he was sexually abused. So I was sharing these stories that, yes, my experience was difficult, but actually there are, dozens of quite well-known people who've had horrific times. Bear Grylls, someone nearly snapped his shoulder. One of the other kids. So I was sharing some of that. And I'll come back to something. Well, no, I think Philip Davies asked me, is there a difference between, you choosing to go to boarding school? So Philip, he was saying that his first year, he really didn't like it. He was very homesick, and he'd chosen to go, and he says, is there a difference? And I, off the top of my head, I couldn't really think, because no one had asked me that before. I'd not really researched it, but in my thinking now, I realize that, well, no, I don't feel there is much difference. If you've chosen to go to boarding school, often we can blame ourselves. It can be actually quite hard on ourselves, because that was me. I hated myself. Why the hell have I chosen this? So, we can actually beat ourselves up, because it's like, oh, I've chosen this. And then the other aspect that I would have shared is that actually we don't have all the data. People say, do you like the school? Do you want to go? You choose to go to this institution, but you don't realize you're going to lose your mother, your father, your sisters, your brothers, your home, the food, friends. You lose everything. So the choice to go to the institution, it seems like, you're choosing education, sport, but I don't think as an 11-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, you have a knowledge of what that means. So that's something I would have said there. On the other side, there was a guy called Tom, who was a professor, and he was quoting this this new research which has been done about boarding schools. The book is called The Psychological Impact of Boarding School, The Trunk in the Hall, co-authored by Penny Kavanagh and Susan McPherson. And I think there's one other lady as well. And he was saying, well, boarding schools are good for you. I wish I had gone. And, my experience was just a one-off. And I'm trying to say, no, it's not a one-off. There's many others who have experienced this. If I look at the research they've done, one of the authors is a governor at a leading boarding school. And, for me, doesn't feel like that's, it feels unbiased, the research, that, It's a boarding school which has had sexual abuse in the past. It probably doesn't have a very good reputation. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like it's an independent research there. The other thing, in that research, they're saying things like it builds resilience, and what I was trying to explain on the call was actually no, boarding school doesn't create resilience, it creates dissociation. They're two very different things. Resilience for me connects us to our hearts, to our emotions. We kind of have that sense of feeling, whereas dissociation, we're boom, gone up into our heads, we're not feeling. And that system can work for a time, but as Judith Herman in her work, Trauma and Recovery, she says that in our third or fourth decade, this system no longer works, and it might be the birth of our children, or when they get to boarding school age or trauma age, it comes forward. The other thing about this evidence, they're trying to, it seems, put the blame onto the parents rather than the boarding schools. And I personally feel if you've had a really good upbringing, what they're trying to say, and then you're put into boarding school, well, actually that can be, according to Anne Power, that can actually be quite problematic, because suddenly you trusted them and they've abandoned you, and actually that can be a lot more devastating for you if you've been securely attached. So yeah, I think that for me was the experience. I think, please do watch it. Let me know what you think. And, it's only a couple of minutes, but it's like, yeah, starting to get this information out there. I've been asked by Suzanne Zedike to talk at the Balby Centre, which is the attachment centre, about boarding school syndrome. There's going to be three different evenings, 6 people talking. That looks really amazing. So I'm excited and a little nervous about that. So I've got a podcast going live this Friday with a retired professor who did a book about child abuse and neglect, and it's brilliant. He's just sharing what neglect is, and at one point I just said, wow, neglect, it just sounds like boarding school syndrome. The symptoms he's saying of what shows up in adult life. So I'm like, wow, really starting to link these two worlds together, neglect and boarding school syndrome. So yeah, that was the experience, and yeah, please let me know what you think. Okay, thank you.